Okay, looks like we're connected. Things are good. Sky is clear here today, so I don't anticipate any internet troubles. We'll be starting in less than a minute. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Okay, so we're continuing on with the series based on the Four Noble Truths, and we're working through the fourth truth, the truth of the path, the Eightfold Noble Path that leads to the cessation of suffering. The factors of the path are usually divided into three categories: Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Panya, or wisdom, incorporates right view and right thought. Or Sila, ethics, incorporates right speech, right action, right livelihood, and Samadhi, or meditation, incorporates the last three, and right energy, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And today we're going to deal with the ethical path factors, and I've kind of broken the standard categories in that I'm including right thought in with the ethical factors. So Sila, as a general principle, is the foundation of any successful practice. If you don't have a good foundation in Sila, you'll never be able to settle the mind enough to develop any samadhi or any wisdom. So paying attention to our Sila is very important. And Sila is defined in a few different ways, different lists, but they overlap to a large extent. One that is probably the most familiar is the 5 precepts. We also have the 10 courses of right and wrong action, which breaks things down a little bit more, but covers the same ground. And here in the Noble Eightfold Path, we have right thought, right speech, right thought is Samma Sankappa, and it's sometimes also been translated as right intention. What is being addressed here is the underlying volitional thought that becomes the impulse for action. It's part of the theory of karma in the Buddhist system, that karma is made initially in the mind, so that an action that's done with the body is only productive of karma, for good or for evil, if the act was conscious and deliberate. Example that's often given is stepping on an insect in the dark. If you accidentally trod on an insect and kill it, without even knowing that you've done so, there's no karma made. So it's not considered either a right or wrong action. It's neutral. You're just stepping, and just the insect happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is different than if you stomp on an insect in the daylight deliberately. That's a karmic act. From the insect's point of view, it makes no difference, but we're uh, considering here the um, consequences for the actor. So the intention behind an action is very important for determining the karma. Uh, the formula in the Eightfold Path for right thought or right intention is that a right thought is one that is a thought of renunciation, as opposed to the opposite would be a thought of sensuality or greed, a thought of non-harming, and a thought that's not coming from delusion, non-delusion. So the three roots of ill are greed, hatred, and delusion. So thoughts that arise from those are wrong thoughts, and the thoughts that arise from their opposites are positive thoughts, karmically wholesome, producive of good results. To turn to the definition of the three roots, the three negative roots are lobha, moha, dosa, that is greed, hatred or ill will, and delusion or ignorance. It, I think it's significant that very often in Buddhist um, texts, the spiritually positive factors are indicated by negatives. So the three wholesome roots are uh, aloba, amoha, adosa. You know, that the non-hatred, non-greed, non-delusion. And I think that the well, certainly the Buddha's use of language was always very precise and considered. So I think there's a teaching here in that the more natural state of the mind is wholesome. So if greed is not present, the mind is naturally uh, gravitating towards a state of contentment and renunciation. If hatred is not present, the mind is naturally gravitating towards uh, kindness and generosity and so forth. So that's something to bear in mind. So right thought is the beginning of all ethical action, whether it's positive or negative. Any karmically effective action, which are the only ones we need to consider in terms of ethics, are initiate with the mind. They begin in the mind, and they can then be carried on through into the body. But there is some karma associated with thought, just a simple thought that doesn't go any further. And we'll see later in the path factors when we deal with right energy that that's all about controlling the mental states and the thoughts. So guarding the doorways of thought is a practice and a foundational practice. So right thought, samasankappa. The next one is right speech, samawacha, and this is defined as speech that is uh, truthful, that is non-harmful, is abstaining from slander and abstaining from foolish babbling. You know, so there's four types of wrong speech, and these are also found in the formula for the 10 courses of right and wrong action. So we have these kinds of speech that are right, or again abstaining from those which are wrong. So the first one is truthfulness, and in the precept, it's musawada waramani, which means I shall abstain from false speech, and it's only in the kind of expansion and explanatory clauses that the other kinds are added in. So there's a great deal of emphasis in the Buddhist teaching about speaking truthfully. It's the most important aspect of right speech, is that the speech is associated with truth, which means representing to the world, to others, reality as you understand it, not attempting to mislead. And again, it has to be intentional. So if you're honestly mistaken yourself and you say something false, believing it to be true, you're not violating the precept or the ethics of speech. Slander is speech that uh, we might call gossip, might be another way of describing it, is using your speech to divide people, saying negative things about one person to another. Um, uh, it's praiseworthy to unite those who are divided, to make peace, and it between contending individuals or factions, and it's negatively, karmically negative, to cause division and to incite incite conflict between incite incite conflict between individuals. So the general advice, if you're uh, and this vice of gossip is a really human trait. Comes up in all kinds of places, wherever humans gather. Uh, One of the favorite things uh, to do is to denigrate others. You should avoid getting caught in that yourself. And if you uh, hear someone else spreading gossip about someone, then uh, the best thing you can do is to try and say counter it by saying something positive about that person. um, this is has to be defined as spreading malicious uh, information about someone to cause division. But I think it needs to be differentiated from, there might be situations where you give someone a fair warning, like you know someone else is a fraud, and they're running some kind of uh, a scheme, so you warn someone else about it. That's not really gossip. Then harsh speech, and is when we use our speech to humiliate or insult another gratuitously, and we know that we can hurt others with our speech, and this is particularly bad when it's done in front of third parties, because then there's a humiliation factor added. So you should try and be gentle in your speech, even if someone uh, merits some criticism, to do it with kindness and not abusively. And the final category of wrong speech is foolish babbling, which we can all be prone to at times, of just running off the mouth. Um, One of the characteristics of righteous speech is that it's associated with meaning, or atta, that our words should have weight and significance. And people will take you more seriously and listen to you more if what you say is always meaningful. I don't. One should not be afraid of the silence. If you have nothing to say, then say nothing at all. Don't try and fill up the air with just whatever silliness comes to mind. This is uh, causing confusion amongst the listeners. People then are kind of, their consciousness is kind of dragged down to a lower level, caught in this nonsense. So right speech is part of the path, and our speech has a karmic weight. It's one of the powers that we have. It's the power of speech. It's important because speech is a way we directly impact on another being's consciousness, for good or for bad. You're inserting ideas into another person's mind. And those ideas can be useful, or they can be harmful. Or they can be true, or they can be false. And you have a karmic weight with a karmic consequence for your speech. Right action is the power of our body, or action is another level of karma making. When we have an impulse in the mind to act, and we perform an action with the body, this increases the karmic potency of the action, of the initial thought, because now it becomes something manifest in the world. And again, the ethical standard here is defined in negative terms, and these overlap with the precepts. Right action is not killing, not stealing, uh, not committing sexual misconduct. So, not killing, panatipata weramani, is defined as the destruction of breathing things. That's panatipata, means breathing things. So it's essentially or animals or humans. And it's deliberate killing is covered by this precept. So this includes also the killing of animals and insects and so on. But the killing of human beings is the worst karma. And killing your mother, your father, or an arahant is considered to be one of the garu kamas, that the heavy actions that always result in your next birth being in hell if you kill your mother, your father, or an arahant. So those are the heaviest kinds of karma, but any killing has a very negative karmic effect. Uh, so there's never, in the Buddhist ethical discourse, there's never really any excuse for killing. So any killing of a living being is a negative karma. So this would include things like abortion and euthanasia, for sure. So the panatipata, not killing, adina dana, weramani, refraining from stealing, and that the Pali here means not given, not taken. So it's, the literal translation would be refrain from taking that which is not given. So appropriating anything which is not yours by right. So given uh, can mean it's given to you, or you've earned it, or you otherwise have some right to it. And this is dealt with pretty extensively because there's obviously all kinds of gray areas and difficulties in cases. This is dealt with pretty extensively in the Vinaya for monks, um, which a lot of it could apply to as a general principle. And there is here, for example, a category of ownerless things. If you find something on the ground and it's impossible to know who it used to belong to, then it's not stealing to appropriate it. but any kind of appropriation of uh, material goods that do not belong to you is a violation of this precept. And the third one is Abramacharya Weramani. Oh no, I'm sorry, Musawada Weramani. Brahmacharya is the stronger precept for celibacy. Musawada Weramani. Kamesu Michachara Weramani. Kamesu Michachara Weramani means refraining from sexual misconduct. Kamesu is to do with sensuality, and Michachara is wrong conduct. So refraining from sexual misconduct. And then, of course, this requires to be defined. And the definition that we find in the Theravada texts uh, is would basically mean not committing adultery. It means not having intimate relations with someone who is either under the protection of their parents, so as we would say underage, or betrothed or married to another, or under vows of celibacy. So it's when you look at it that way, it's a fairly liberal standard. So sexual activity between two unattached consenting adults is not a violation of the precept. It still might be, um, although it's not an ethical problem, it still might be spiritually negative in that it's an overindulgence in sensuality is not conducive to enlightenment. But the ethical concern is not disturbing established relationships. So that's the definition for sexual misconduct. The last point covered here under ethics is right livelihood, which is when you think about it, it's interesting uh, and significant that the Buddha included this as a separate term in the Eightfold Path, because anything you do by your lively to make your livelihood would involve either speech or action or both. So you would think it's redundant to have this, but there is a very uh, strong influence on your mind, on your psyche, on your karma of how you make your living. Livelihood is how we acquire nutriment in the broad sense, acquiring the necessities and extras of life. And um, right, and in the formula for the Eightfold Path, it's not actually defined. It's left pretty vague. It just says he makes his living by righteous means and not by unrighteous means. You know? But elsewhere, there is a definition of 5 forbidden trades that are always wrong livelihood, and those are dealing in weapons, dealing in poisons, dealing in animals for slaughter, uh, dealing in human slaves, and oh, the fifth one's slipping my mind now. Dealing in intoxicants. So there are trades that are inherently unwholesome, but anything else that you do to make a living, uh, the rightness or wrongness of the livelihood will depend on your conduct of that trade, whether you're being honest and straightforward with your employers, your employees, your colleagues, your customers, everyone you have an economic relationship with, whether you're treating them fairly and decently with honesty and kindness. So those are the That's a summary of the ethical path factors. That is uh, right thought I've included here, although it's usually included under the wisdom factors. Right thought, right speech, right action, and right livelihood. So I'll stop there and we'll go on now to the questions and answers and see what I see. The chat is very busy here. Let's have a look at what we got. Regarding your quote from the Thai Ajahn to that bhikkhu not wanting to be a Brahma in last week's Q&A, you don't just go from human to dog or ant or amoeba, do you? Especially when you're renouncing in search of wisdom. What would make sense, though, is that the same deep-rooted tonality and very subtle mental qualities existing now, which are essentially enforced habits, continue to the next, and these habits change subtly over long durations. Um, Actually, it is possible to fall even from a Brahma realm to an animal realm. And there are stories in the commentaries of human beings falling directly to the animal realm. There's one story about a monk. This is just one example. There's a monk who uh, was mostly a good monk, but uh, in in his last year of life, he'd been given a particularly fine set of robes. And as he lay in his deathbed, he was stroking his robe and becoming attached to how fine the cloth was, and caught in the sensuality of it. And he ended up being reborn as an insect crawling around on that robe. And the other monks wanted to take the robe and cut it up and distribute the cloth. And the Buddha told them to wait 7 days. And the explanation was the Buddha knew he was an insect crawling on the robe, but that he would only remain in that state for 7 days. Then he would die and be reborn in a better condition. But if the robe was cut up, that would upset the insect so much it would, because of the he was caught in the sensuality of the robe even more, that he would be then caught in the lower realm for a long time. So you can't really, it's not always a gradual thing. People can, your mind can fall into animal-like states from a human state quite easily, and be reborn into a lower condition. Ajahn, could you sometime give a talk on renunciation alone, like in depth, including mental and emotional renunciation, etc.? Things hard to renounce or even discern. Okay, Dinka, I'll keep that in mind as a possible topic. Is it possible to change the pathways of the mind in a way that, for example, when we touch our fingers and see a tree, we experience the touch sensation in the tree and not the fingers? Uh, if it is possible to portray a physical pain to the external world and don't feel it in an internal world? Um, I don't know. That's not something I actually even see as useful. It sounds like a kind of falling into a delusion if you if you can't tell the difference between your sensations and the sensations of a tree. I don't know. That's it doesn't really make sense to me. Is being a soldier included in that list? It's not included in the list of wrong livelihoods, um, but the killing, if a soldier is at war and commits acts of killing, he's still making bad karma. And Buddha was explicit about this when he was asked by a warrior of his time about it. It's kind of and the Buddha said something interesting about war as well. He said in a sermon that was primarily directed to avoiding sensuality, he included as an example, he included men strap on armor and take up sword and shield and hack and hew at one another. The reason being greed for sense desires. So I see this as kind of the Buddha's saying that, and if we could extrapolate from that, a more general statement is that wars are generally fought for material gain.